Hello and good evening. Welcome to Leicestershire Law Society's podcast for the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. I am your host for tonight's podcast. My name is Zainab Zaeem-Sattar. I am a litigation lawyer, recently qualified, and I work for Summerfield Browne Solicitors. I'm also part of the main committee for Leicestershire Law Society, as well as a number of volunteering roles, which I will not go into for tonight's podcast. I have with me tonight the most loveliest Gina Samuel Richards. She is a qualified solicitor and has been so for a number of years, spanning a brilliant career of 13 plus years. She's co-director of the award-winning AGR Law, and she is also Deputy Vice President of Leicestershire Law Society. So welcome, Gina. How are we tonight?
Thank you. Very well, thank you. It's been a long week.
Yeah, it is. So for those who are listening and possibly watching, it is Friday evening and it has been a very long week, but we are excited for the weekend and we are excited to discuss this podcast this evening. So we're going to kickstart off with, why do we have the day, Gina? So if I can present that question to you, please.
So thank you, Zainab. The International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination came about following an incident in Summerfield, South Africa in 1960. So obviously at the time, South Africa was exercising apartheid, states held apartheid, with the segregations between blacks, whites, and all those in between, really. So we mustn't forget that, because there were a number of different coloured barriers and coloured groups that were identified, and everybody was kept separate in accordance to that. But in Summerfield, South Africa in 1960, 69 people were killed following a peaceful demonstration, and they were demonstrating the apartheid laws that had been passed. So the UN decided that something needed to be done about this, and they were trying to push for all human beings to be recognised, that they were born free, that they had dignity and they had their rights and were able to contribute constructively to all democracy, developing worlds and societies and so forth. So the UN wanted to push an agenda to have each country do away with laws which could be perceived as being racist and actually discriminated against the people of that state. And they set up the General Assembly in order to try to push this agenda and to influence governments to prevent further discriminatory legislation from being passed. So the General Assembly adopted a programme of activities around about 1979, and then they sort of went from there, really trying to influence each of the countries to combat racism. And it did take, it's taken a number of years really to do so. I mean, even with ourselves, we haven't really started seeing some pretty progressive law until sort of the mid-90s, although we had, some, anti-discrimination and race relations acts passed in the 60s, but the real progressiveness didn't come around until the sort of 1990s and onwards. And it was like that for a lot of the developed nations as well.
Okay. It's quite interesting. I mean, we mentioned apartheid, and that is something I remember, studying about, and my children sort of studied it vaguely as well. And you mentioned that the day came about back in the 60s, and then the laws were adopted in 79. I mean, it's a fantastic initiative that the United Nations decided to start, and somebody had to start from somewhere. So it's really good that there is this, initiative moving forward. But in terms of today, we are in 2021. The world has seen a pandemic. We've seen loads of different changes with the way mindsets are and how things work. And do you feel that this particular day or these rules are still required in today's day and age?
I definitely do. I mean, we only really need to look back to last year, really, when, the Black Lives Matter protests were happening following the death of George Floyd. And that was, a state-sanctioned murder, really, wasn't it? It was state-sanctioned killing, because it was people, the police, who were meant to be there to serve and protect, who were actually killing one of their citizens. Obviously, there's going to be a court case and grand jury and so forth, and they've got to consider whether reasonable force was used. But just being a casual bystander and looking at what happened, it would be very, very difficult as a casual bystander to say that it was reasonable force and it was necessary to have a man pinned on the floor for just short of 9 minutes kneeling on his neck. And you know, as a casual bystander, one would say that was murder, really, wouldn't you? But obviously these things have to be proven in the court of law. But from that, there was a very big movement, and it's not just the Black Lives Matter movement itself, but I think it caused some introspection by a number of people and organizations to actually look at, actually, are we still profiting from discriminatory structures that were set up in the past, you know, how many hundreds of years in 2021, and is there any place for such structures? I mean, I think very great work is being done by the British Museum, who actually looked at the artifacts and the people they were celebrating, and actually thought they actually need to tell a proper story about these people and where these artifacts have come from, and tell the real story. It's not just a celebration of British Empire, but it's actually colonialism and some of the most devastating human rights atrocities that took place, you know, from the 1400s, 1500s, you know, until sort of 1890 with the abolishment of slavery. So we need to look at those sorts of things. And you also have to look at the things that happened in India, when India was pretty much treated as the third state of the British Empire, where, you know, it was used basically as the fields, you know, the food supplies for Britain, and millions of Indians, you know, suffered and starved to death. And whereas British Empire may have had its greatness in some respects, it also left behind a very terrible legacy. And it's very important that these things come to fruition, people are educated on these things, and people can have a true understanding of what it means to be British.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned a lot of interesting facts there. In particular, I'm going to draw the attention to India, because with a heritage from India, my parents are from India. I've had all sorts, I've come across all sorts, ranging from the way I look to the way I possibly dress, sometimes with my name. People are always confused by my name. And I guess having a character on EastEnders with the name Zainab has actually really helped, because I always get, oh, are you like Zainab from EastEnders? And I'm like, yeah, you know, that helps. But, you know, it kind of defeats the purpose of why my name's there. My name's Arabic, you know, it stems from the Arabic meaning. People just stop there. But very interesting what you said. And when I was looking into what this day is about, when I was doing my research and looking into the elimination of racism, I've seen a lot of focus on the youth. Yes. What are the youth of today doing? And as a mother of 4 children, you know, I've got 4 kids, sorry. My eldest 3 are boys, and my youngest is a girl, she's 12. My boys are 19 and 18. So I do have buy one, get one free. I've got a pair of twins, which is why 19 and 18, although there's 3 kids. One thing I found is, as a mother, yes, I would like them to be proactive in the elimination of racism, but do I, in particular, want it to be just solely on their shoulders? No. For me, it's bigger than the youth of this country or this world. So that's my next question to you. In terms of the obligation being put on the youth, what do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's great that the youth are aware to racism and other discriminatory practices, and they are now saying enough is enough. I think it's very, very admirable that they have this energy to really lobby for these changes. And I think if they can hold on to that energy and that motivation and those ways of thinking, then as they become people of influence, then we might actually see a good change in the systems and structures of this world. The issues that I have right now is actually that youth can lobby, but they don't hold the power. And where structural racism comes from is a place of power. And I know some people sometimes say, oh, if you know, a black person gives a job to another black person over a white person, that's racism. That's not actually the true definition of what being racist is. Being racist is actually using the power that you have and systems, and it's not even the power the individual has, it's systems and infrastructures and the way that, you know, the country is built and set up, which actually creates a sort of a system of racism, if you like. And it's really those who have that need to be doing something about it. So, you know, you say the politicians must lead by example. You know, if you look at journalism, I mean, I didn't sort of look at the statistics and remind myself of them. However, significant numbers of journalists, such as the editors and higher up in the echelons, actually come from private education. So they were the Eton types. It's the same with the politicians as well. And then when you start looking at actually who owns the big companies and who's actually taking government investments and things like that, they're going to be friends of these people. So you need to look at the structures of our society and say, well, if all of these people are holding the power, it's really on them to take steps towards being anti-racist and discriminatory, really. And then in the hope that them taking those steps will filter down.
Okay, that's quite interesting take on it. You talk about people in influential positions and power. You and I both sit on the main committee for Leicestershire Law Society. You're Deputy Vice President of Leicestershire Law Society. Can I then ask you, what is the LLS doing in terms of elimination of racism?
I think that's quite an interesting question. And I think the LLS, they have tried to take steps in being anti-discriminatory. And I think that's where you sort of look at the LLS's history in the sense that it's had, is it 11 women that have been the presidents of the LLS now. And I know that's only 11 women over a number of years, but it's 11 women. And that's, other law societies can't boast the same statistics. And then you're looking at, you know, me being sort of the first Black DVP, and, you know, if all goes well and I'm on trajectory to become president in a few years' time, then I will be the first Black president of the LLS as well. So they are taking steps to actually introduce diversity into its board. I mean, if you even look at RLS's board setup, there are a number of women, there are a number of people of colour, which is great. And it's, and I think they are actually having a conversation internally as well about who we give opportunities to also. So, I mean, if you look at the next magazine that's coming out quite soon, you'll see there are articles in there by a young chap that our editor has actually worked with, who has a disability, and he talks about disability in law. So, you know, it's quite great that LLS is looking at these things, and obviously LLS isn't perfect. You know, it's going to take some time for these, you know, quite old organizations to actually get there, but they're having the conversation, they're being introspective, they're looking at their own biases, they're looking at how to bring diversity onto the board and how to actually bring diversity to its membership as well. So I think it's actually quite fantastic, and, you know, and really great that this year Crystal has actually made her year about diversity also. So I think it's quite important to do so. And it's actually quite important not just to think about diversity, but also being inclusive. So ensuring that you bring people on from different backgrounds, you look at social mobility and bring these people on, but you also give them the opportunity to and listen to them as well. Yeah,
I mean, I echo everything that you said, and I agree. And for me, as a newbie, because whilst I'm not, I am age-wise very old, because I do not class myself as young. I am a mother of 4. Career-wise, I am very new and I am very young. And I have been a member of Leicestershire Law Society for a number of years, first starting off as a sub-board member brought on by one of the previous presidents of LLS. And then now I am committee member and have been for a while. And I have to say, it's not just a tick box exercise for LLS like some organizations. Maybe it is a genuine proactiveness that LLS are carrying out. And I think that's what differentiates people who are there just for the tick box exercise and those who are genuinely doing something about it.
Yes.
So that then brings me on to my last and final question in terms of fight racism. So the elimination of racial discrimination has the hashtag fight racism. What does that mean?
So again, that is looking at how you can be anti-racist. So it's about challenging the structures that we have, where those structures are being racist, for want of a better phrase, but also those structures that are preventing people from moving up or taking opportunities that ought to be available to them. So I suppose it is those of us in a position of authority actually looking at, well, what are our personal biases? For example, when we are employing people, or whether we're inviting people to come onto organisations and then promoting them through those organisations, is also being an ally. You know, I'm not sure if you did any of the reading last year or listened to any of the podcasts and the speeches and so forth and the interviews, but a lot of people spoke about allyship, and you know, black people saying to white folk, you know, to be our ally is to call out your friends and your family members when they make those jokes where you know they're not good jokes and you may feel uncomfortable about those jokes, but you kind of smile them off because you don't want to cause an offense to your family or your friend. Well, actually, we're now in that space where we need to all be saying that's not okay. And the reason why I use the word we as a black woman is because we also need to be aware of those words in any form of discrimination, not just in racial discrimination. So we need to do that. We need to be calling out racism as we see it. And I always say to people, educate yourself as well, because you may not understand, you may have a view of, you know, woke society and, you know, all those sort of words that have been thrown around and people being anti-woke and so on and so forth. And you may be taking those from certain parts of the media, but what I would say to you is that you need to do some reading of your own and do deeper research. You can't just take on board what mainstream media is saying, because because those parts of mainstream media, some of them are anti-woke and some of them will only talk about racism and any sort of issue when major events has happened, like when George Floyd happened. You know, everybody was on the bandwagon and then it kind of died off the news cycle. Thus, I would say, you know, there are other places that you can go to listen to what people have to say about anti-discrimination in general, and to move away from some of this not very helpful rhetoric around the different races and around the different religions and so on and so forth, and some of the activities that people are trying to push for more just and equal society. And also, you need to be a voice to those who can't be a voice. So, you know, some people's voices are silenced, and it's really important that if you're in a position to stand up and speak for somebody, you should do so.
Absolutely. It's like one thing comes to mind when you say that. It's when people start off with the sentence by saying, I'm not racist, but and you know it's coming. You just absolutely know it's coming. And that dread just builds up in your body. And I mean, I'm a chatterbox, I'm a loudmouth, and I'm constantly calling stuff out. But one thing I have noticed about myself is when I'm getting it, when I'm feeling it, I do exactly what you said, which is sometimes I put a smile on my face and I walk away. You know, I remember once going into a shopping mall and by mistake, instead of going to Curry's and PC World, I walked into a supermarket, and I'm not going to say what supermarket, and I went, oh, wrong shop. And immediately the people joked and gave the name out of a lesser supermarket. And I just looked, and at that moment in time, I didn't realize it was racism. I am talking 10, 15 years ago, and I just looked and said, what comment is that? And I then just walked off. And it wasn't until a little while later when it was broiling in my mind, and I was like, oh, that's what it was. You know, and by then it was too late. I'd already moved on and gone away. But it still, to this day, every time I walk into that shop, you know, that's the first thing I think of. So it is certainly something that is very prevalent. And it is something, like you said, be a voice for the people, call it out, regardless of who it is, because otherwise, how are we going to eliminate it? And it's not just on the youth of today, it's on everybody's shoulder. Everybody has an obligation to do that. And that's how it goes. So in terms of today's podcast, thank you very much, Gina. It was absolutely fantastic to have you here and for me to be in your presence and ask you these questions and build up the narrative. And to everyone listening out there, I hope you enjoyed tonight's podcast. What I will say is that it is still very, very important that we continue to battle, because it is a battle at the end of the day. We continue to voice out where we need to voice out and reach out. If you yourself cannot be that voice, then reach out to those who you think will be able to help you. And if they can't, then they will point you in the right direction. And always remember, Leicestershire Law Society is here for the elimination of racial discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab. Take care.
Bye.